What happens when a man you publicly shame turns out to be the only one holding the floor together? How far can disrespect go before consequences arrive through the systems people trust the most? I did not raise my voice that day in the church, but everything changed forever. My name is Thomas, and I am 59 years old. I've spent 32 years as a structural engineer, the kind of man who builds foundations that last longer than the people who walk on them. I've never been loud. I've never needed to be. I raised my son alone after his mother left when he was 3, and I did it quietly, the way you build a house. One careful decision at a time, no shortcuts, no excuses. I worked double shifts when I had to. I missed sleep, not meals. I made sure Daniel had what he needed, not what I wanted him to see me provide. That's the difference between a father and a performer. The morning of Daniel's wedding, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and knotted my tie 3 times before I got it right. My hands were steadier than they'd been in weeks. I'd chosen a simple charcoal suit, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. That was the point. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there because my son was getting married, and that was enough. The church was old, stone and stained glass, the kind of place that makes you feel small even when you're standing tall. I arrived 40 minutes early. The parking lot was almost empty. I walked through the heavy wooden doors and felt the cool air settle against my face. The interior smelled like candle wax and old wood polish. Rows of pews stretched toward an altar decorated with white flowers and gold ribbon. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked like someone else's vision. I took a seat in the 3rd row on the groom's side, because that's where they'd told me to sit. Not the front row, the 3rd. Daniel's fiancée Lauren had explained it to me on the phone 2 weeks earlier. "We want to balance the sight lines," she'd said. "It'll photograph better." I'd said fine. It wasn't worth an argument. People began to arrive. I watched them filter in, groups of 2 and 3, all dressed like they were attending a fashion show instead of a wedding. The women wore dresses that shimmered under the church lights. The men wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. I recognized a few faces from the engagement party, Lauren's friends, her family, people who'd looked past me like I was part of the furniture. Lauren's mother arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony. I'd met her twice before. Her name was Vivian. She was a tall woman, sharp-featured, with blonde hair styled into a helmet of curls. She wore a dress the color of champagne and heels that clicked against the stone floor like a countdown. She swept down the center aisle with her husband, Lauren's stepfather, Gerald, trailing behind her. Gerald was a real estate developer, the kind of man who talked about square footage the way other people talked about their children. He had a wide smile and a firm handshake and absolutely nothing behind his eyes. Vivian paused when she saw me. Her gaze flicked over my suit, my tie, my face. She didn't smile. She turned to one of the ushers and said something I couldn't hear. The usher nodded. Vivian moved on. I felt it then, the first cold thread of something wrong. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't loud. It was just there, like a crack in a beam you can't see until the weight shifts. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The church filled. I sat quietly and watched. Daniel's friends clustered on the left side, laughing and taking pictures. Lauren's family dominated the right, a wall of designer labels and confident voices. I didn't belong to either group. I was a single point in the 3rd row, surrounded by empty space. The music started. Everyone stood. The bridal party entered, a procession of matching dresses and nervous smiles. Then Lauren appeared at the far end of the aisle, her arm linked with Gerald's. She looked beautiful. I'll give her that. The dress was stunning, all lace and silk, and she moved like she knew every eye in the room was on her. Gerald walked her down the aisle with his chest puffed out, like he'd done something other than show up. Daniel stood at the altar. He was wearing a black tuxedo, his hair combed back, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked older than 29. He looked tired. When Lauren reached him, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I saw that. I knew my son. The ceremony began. The priest spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together, about the sacred bond of marriage. I listened and didn't hear a word. I was watching Daniel. I was watching the way he glanced toward Lauren's family, the way his shoulders tensed when Vivian leaned forward in her seat. Then it happened. The priest paused to take a breath, and in that moment of silence, Vivian's voice cut through the church like a blade. At least he has someone to clean up after him now. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't trying to be quiet. She said it loud enough for half the church to hear, and she was looking directly at me. Lauren turned her head and laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, bright and sharp and cruel. A few people in the rows behind Vivian shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Most people just stared. I didn't move. I didn't react. I looked at Vivian, and then I looked at Daniel. My son was staring at his mother-in-law. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. He wasn't laughing. The priest cleared his throat and tried to continue, but Daniel raised one hand. "Wait," Daniel said. The church went silent. Daniel turned toward Vivian. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and in that look, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. I saw my son. Then he looked at me, and his eyes said, "I'm sorry." The priest stammered something about continuing, and Daniel nodded, but the air in the church had changed. The ceremony went on, but it was fractured now, wrong. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thin and awkward. I stayed in my seat while everyone filed out. I watched Daniel and Lauren walk back down the aisle together, her hand on his arm, his face blank. Vivian followed, her head high, her expression smug. Gerald trailed behind her like a shadow. I was the last person to leave the church. I didn't always feel like a ghost in my son's life. There was a time when I was the center of it, the fixed point everything else revolved around. But that was before Lauren, before Vivian, before Daniel learned that there were people in the world who measured worth by appearance instead of action. I raised Daniel in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood where people mowed their own lawns and fixed their own cars. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. It was stable. It was ours. After Daniel's mother left, and she left fast, no note, no custody fight, just gone, I took every extra shift I could find. I worked on bridges, on high-rises, on projects that kept me away for days at a time. But I always came home. I always made sure Daniel had what he needed. I paid for his braces when he was 12. I paid for his car when he turned 16. I paid for his college tuition every semester, in full, because I didn't want him starting his life in debt. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't ask for gratitude. I just did it, because that's what a father does. Daniel graduated with a degree in marketing and got a job at a firm downtown. He was good at it. He was smart, capable, the kind of person people noticed. That's when he met Lauren. She worked in the same building, different floor, and she was everything Daniel wasn't used to. She was polished, confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room and changed the air. She came from money, not just money, but the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself, because everyone already knew. Her family had connections, properties, a name that opened doors. Daniel fell hard. I met Lauren 6 months into their relationship. Daniel brought her to the house for dinner, and I cooked pasta because that's what I knew how to make. Lauren smiled and said it was lovely, but she barely touched her plate. She spent most of the evening looking around the house, her eyes cataloging everything, the worn couch, the outdated kitchen, the framed photos on the walls. She didn't say anything rude. She didn't have to. I met Vivian and Gerald 2 months later, at a dinner Lauren organized at a restaurant I couldn't pronounce. Vivian spent the entire meal talking about their vacation home in Aspen, their yacht club membership, their plans to expand Gerald's business into new markets. Gerald nodded along and checked his phone. Daniel sat quietly and tried to contribute, but every time he spoke, Vivian cut him off with another story, another name drop, another reminder that they existed on a level Daniel and I didn't. I didn't fit into their world. I knew that. I accepted it. What I didn't expect was how quickly Daniel would start to believe I was the problem. It started small. Daniel stopped inviting me to events. He'd mention them afterward, casually, like it had slipped his mind. Oh, we went to Lauren's parents' place for brunch. It was just family. I wasn't family, apparently. Not the right kind. Then came the engagement. Daniel told me over the phone. He didn't ask me to be there when he proposed. He didn't ask my opinion. He just called and said, "We're getting married," and I said, "Congratulations." Because what else was I supposed to say? The wedding planning was a nightmare I wasn't part of. Lauren handled everything. Vivian handled everything. I got updates in group texts, impersonal and efficient. Venue confirmed. Flower selected. Guest list finalized. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't needed. I was just expected to show up and stay quiet. The rehearsal dinner was worse. It was held at a country club, all white tablecloths and crystal glasses, and I felt like an exhibit in a museum. People looked at me and then looked away. Vivian introduced me to her friends as Daniel's father, and the way she said it made it sound like an apology. Gerald clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Must be proud, huh?" and walked away before I could answer. Daniel avoided me that night. Every time I tried to talk to him, someone pulled him away. Lauren, one of her bridesmaids, a cousin, a friend. I finally cornered him near the bar. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the kid who used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner. Then the mask came back. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a lot going on." "You don't seem fine." I said, "I'm fine." He walked away, and I let him, because I didn't know what else to do. The reception hall was already being set up when I drove past it the day before the wedding. I'd gotten the address from one of those group texts. It was a massive building, all glass and steel, the kind of place that charged by the hour and served food on plates the size of frisbees. I didn't stop. I just drove past and felt the weight of everything I'd done to get Daniel to this point, and how little it seemed to matter now. That night, I sat in my home office and went through the files I'd kept for 30 years. Bank statements, trust documents, contracts, guarantees. I'd been organized, careful, the way I was with everything. I'd set up a trust fund for Daniel when he was 5, adding to it every year, every bonus, every extra dollar I could spare. I'd listed myself as the trustee, with conditions. Specific conditions. Conditions that kicked in when Daniel turned 30, or when he got married, whichever came first. I'd never told him. I'd never told anyone. It wasn't a secret, exactly. It was just private. The same way I'd privately funded his education, privately covered his first car, privately made sure he had a safety net he didn't know existed. I looked at the documents and thought about Vivian's voice in the church, about Lauren's laugh, about Daniel's hollow expression at the altar. I thought about how quickly people forget the foundation when they're busy admiring the wallpaper. I made 3 phone calls that night. One to my accountant, one to my lawyer, one to the trustee I'd appointed years ago, a man named Richard who'd worked with me since Daniel was a kid. "I need everything ready by Saturday," I said. "That's the wedding, right?" Richard asked. "That's right." "You sure about this, Tom?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Daniel's apartment was in a new building downtown, all polished concrete and floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd helped him move in 2 years ago, back when he was still talking to me like I was someone who mattered. Now I stood outside his door on the Thursday before the wedding and knocked 3 times before he answered. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes and his hair was uncombed. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, the kind of casual outfit he never would have worn around Lauren's family. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing here?" I wanted to talk. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was clean, but lived in. There were wedding gifts stacked in boxes along one wall, thank you cards scattered across the kitchen counter. I could see Lauren's influence everywhere. The expensive furniture, the abstract art on the walls, the wine rack stocked with bottles I couldn't afford. Daniel gestured toward the couch. You want something to drink? I'm fine. We sat down, the silence stretching between us like a gap I didn't know how to cross. How are you holding up? I asked. He laughed, but it was bitter. I'm great, Dad. Getting married in 2 days, everything's perfect. You don't sound like it's perfect. What do you want me to say? The truth would be nice. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. I'm tired. I'm tired of planning, tired of pretending, tired of trying to keep everyone happy. You can't keep everyone happy. I know that. But I have to try, don't I? That's what this is all about. What's all about? This wedding, this marriage, this whole thing. He looked up at me, and his eyes were raw. You think I don't know what they think of you? You think I don't hear what they say? I know what they think. And you're just okay with it? I don't care what they think, I said. I care what you think. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. I think I'm in over my head. I think I made promises I'm not sure I can keep. I think I'm marrying into a family that looks at me like I'm a project, something they can fix and polish and show off. Then why are you doing it? Because I love her. He turned around. I know you don't believe me, but I do. I love Lauren. I just wish it didn't come with all of this. All of what? The pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling that I'm not good enough, that I need to be more, do more, prove more. Vivian and Gerald, they've been amazing to me. They've given me opportunities, introduced me to people, helped me with my career. I owe them. You don't owe them anything. They paid for this wedding, Dad. They paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the food, all of it. They said they wanted to do it, that it was their gift to us. How am I supposed to say no to that? I felt something cold settle in my chest. They paid for the wedding? Yeah, Lauren's parents. They insisted. And what did they ask for in return? He looked away. Nothing. They just wanted to help. Daniel. They wanted me to be grateful. They wanted me to remember who made this possible. He shook his head. And maybe they wanted me to understand that you couldn't. That's what Vivian said anyway. She said it was a shame you couldn't contribute, that it must be hard for you to watch from the sidelines. I stood up slowly. She said that. She meant well. No, she didn't. Daniel met my eyes, and I saw the conflict there, the guilt, the confusion. What do you want me to do, Dad? Tell them no? Embarrass Lauren? Embarrass myself? I want you to understand something, I said. You don't owe them. You don't owe anyone. And you sure as hell don't need to apologize for where you came from or who raised you. I'm not apologizing. You are. You've been apologizing for me since you met them, and I let it happen because I thought you'd figure it out on your own. But you haven't. So I'm telling you now. You're about to marry into a family that measures worth by price tags and appearances. That's fine. That's their choice. But don't let them rewrite your history. Don't let them erase what we built together. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What if it's too late? It's never too late. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Lauren's talking about moving, about buying a house in her parents' neighborhood. Vivian's already planning trips, holidays, family events. They have my whole life mapped out, and I don't know how to tell them I'm not sure I want it. Then don't tell them. Show them. He frowned. What do you mean? I thought about the documents in my office, about the calls I'd made, about the plan that was already in motion. Just trust me. And trust yourself. That's it? That's your advice? That's all I've got. He walked me to the door. Before I left, he said, "Dad? Yeah? I'm sorry about what happened at the rehearsal and the church. Vivian was out of line." "I know. I should have said something." "You did. You stopped the ceremony. That's more than most people would do." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I left him standing in the doorway and drove home through the dark streets. The city lights blurred past my window as I thought about everything Daniel had told me. About Vivian's subtle manipulation, about the wedding they'd paid for, about the life they'd mapped out for my son without consulting him. I thought about the way Daniel's shoulders had slumped when he talked about the pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling of not being enough. When I got back to my house, I went straight to my office. The room was dark except for the desk lamp I switched on. The calendar on my desk showed Saturday circled in red ink, the wedding date I'd marked 3 months ago. Back then, I'd hoped this wedding might bring Daniel happiness. Now I knew it was bringing him something else entirely. I opened my laptop and checked my email. There were 3 new messages waiting. One from Richard, my accountant, confirming that all the trust documents were in order and ready for execution. One from my lawyer, Patricia, attaching the final paperwork I'd need. One from the bank trustee with a subject line that simply read, "Everything is ready, waiting for your signal." I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me like physical force. I wasn't angry. Anger would have made this easier. I was just tired of being invisible, tired of watching my son twist himself into shapes to fit into a world that would never truly accept him, tired of Vivian and Gerald taking credit for a life I'd built brick by brick. I pulled out the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside were photographs I'd collected over the years. Daniel as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Daniel on his first day of kindergarten, wearing a backpack almost as big as he was. Daniel at his Little League games, his face serious with concentration. Daniel at his high school graduation, tossing his cap in the air with his friends. I'd taken these photos not to show anyone, but to remember. To remind myself why I worked the double shifts, why I skipped vacations, why I put every extra dollar into his future instead of mine. These moments weren't for display. They were the foundation of everything we'd built together. I closed the box and put it back in the drawer. Then I opened a folder on my desk labeled Daniel Financial Records. Inside were 30 years of documentation. Every tuition payment, every loan I'd co-signed, every deposit into the trust fund, every sacrifice I'd made, recorded in black and white, undeniable and complete. Tomorrow was Friday. The wedding was Saturday. I had one more day to change my mind, to decide that maybe confrontation wasn't the answer, that maybe I should just keep quiet and let things play out naturally. But I'd been quiet for too long. I'd watched from the sidelines while Vivian and Gerald positioned themselves as Daniel's saviors. I'd smiled politely while they erased my contributions and rewrote the story of my son's life. I'd stood in the 3rd row of the church while they took the place of honor. No more. I picked up my phone and sent 3 text messages, one to Richard. Confirmed for Saturday. Have everything ready. One to Patricia. I'm going through with it. Thank you for your support. One to the bank trustee. Execute the trust activation on Saturday as planned. All 3 responded within minutes with confirmations. I shut down my laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and sat in the darkness of my office for a long time. Through the window, I could see the neighborhood where I'd raised Daniel, the modest houses, the tree-lined streets, the world that Vivian thought wasn't good enough. But it had been good enough. It had been more than good enough. It had been everything. And tomorrow, everyone would know it. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and went for a drive. I didn't have anywhere specific to be. The wedding wasn't until tomorrow. But I needed to move, to think, to let the pieces of what I was about to do settle into their final positions. I drove past Daniel's old elementary school, the red brick building where I used to drop him off every morning before heading to work. I'd always waited until he was inside before driving away, watching through the chain-link fence as he joined his friends on the playground. I remembered the parent-teacher conferences where his teachers told me he was bright, well-behaved, a pleasure to have in class. I remembered thinking that maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. I drove past the baseball field where I'd coached his little league team for 3 years. We'd never won a championship, but that hadn't been the point. The point was showing up to every practice, teaching the kids about teamwork and sportsmanship, making sure they knew that someone cared about them. Daniel had played shortstop and he'd been good. Not great, but good enough to earn the respect of his teammates. I drove past the diner where we used to eat breakfast every Sunday morning. Always the same booth by the window. Always the same order. Pancakes for him, eggs and toast for me. We'd talk about school, about his friends, about whatever movie we were planning to see that weekend. Simple conversations, nothing profound, but they were ours. Those Sunday mornings had been sacred to me, a ritual that anchored our week. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of my accountant's office. It was Friday morning, and the building was quiet. Most people had already started their weekend or were finishing up last-minute work before disappearing until Monday. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was empty, my footsteps echoing off the tile floor. Richard's office was at the end of the hall, a corner unit with windows overlooking downtown. His door was open, and I could see him at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, surrounded by folders and documents. He looked up when I knocked. "Tom, right on time." "I'm always on time," I said, stepping inside. "That's one of the things I've always appreciated about you." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. We have a lot to go over." I sat, and Richard pushed one of the folders toward me. "This is everything. The trust documentation, the original terms you established when Daniel was 5, all the amendments you've made over the years, and the activation clause that triggers tomorrow when he gets married." I opened the folder and scanned the pages. The numbers were there in black and white, more substantial than I'd even remembered. "How much exactly?" Richard flipped to a summary page and pointed to the total. $2.4 million. That's principal plus accumulated interest and dividends over 24 years. You've been incredibly disciplined about your contributions. I wanted to make sure he had options. He'll have more than options. With the interest alone, he'll have an annual income of approximately $96,000. That's assuming conservative investment returns of 4%. I nodded slowly. It was real money, life-changing money, the kind of money that would give Daniel true independence, not the conditional, string-attached generosity of his in-laws. "And the conditions?" I asked. "Still in place, exactly as you specified. He can't access the principal until he's 35, but starting tomorrow, he can draw on the interest. The funds are protected from creditors, from bankruptcy proceedings, and from divorce settlements. It's ironclad, Tom. No one can touch this except Daniel." "Good." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me over the rim of his glasses. "You know, in 30 years of managing trusts and estates, I've never seen anyone do what you've done. Most people tell their kids about this kind of thing. Most people want the credit, want to be thanked, want to be recognized for their generosity. I'm not most people." "No, you're definitely not." He paused. "Are you absolutely sure you want to reveal this at the wedding reception? It's going to cause a scene. A big one." "The scene's already started. I'm just changing the ending." "Fair enough." Richard pulled out another set of documents. "I'll be there tomorrow with everything you need. Original trust documents, notarized copies, account statements, proof of every contribution you've made. If anyone questions you, if anyone suggests you're exaggerating or lying, you'll have documentation to back up every single claim." "Thank you, Richard. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what happens when you drop this bomb." He smiled grimly. Though I have to admit, I'm curious to see the look on Vivian's face. That makes two of us. I left Richard's office and drove across town to see my lawyer. Patricia's office was in an older building near the courthouse, the kind of place with creaky floors and radiators that clanked. But Patricia didn't care about appearances. She cared about results, and in 15 years of handling my legal work, she'd never let me down. She was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting at her desk with yet another folder spread open in front of her. Patricia was in her early 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her practice on helping regular people navigate complex legal situations, and she'd developed a reputation for being both thorough and unforgiving. "Tom," she said, standing to shake my hand, "I've been reviewing everything one more time. Sit down." I sat in the leather chair across from her desk, the same chair I'd sat in when I'd first hired her to set up Daniel's trust, when I'd bought the house on Evergreen Street, when I'd co-signed his various loans and needed documentation to protect my interests. "Let me walk you through this one final time," Patricia said, putting on her reading glasses. "Just so we're absolutely clear about what you're revealing tomorrow and what documentation we have to support it." She opened the folder and pulled out the first document. First, the trust fund. We have the original trust agreement from when Daniel was 5, every amendment you've made, every contribution you've deposited, and every quarterly statement for the past 24 years. The total, as Richard confirmed, is $2.4 million. This is undeniable. Anyone who questions it will be contradicting official bank records. Good. Second, Daniel's education funding. We have receipts for every tuition payment you made, 8 semesters of undergraduate study at $40,000 per year on average. That's $320,000 total, paid entirely by you. No loans, no scholarships, no help from anyone else. I nodded. I remembered writing those checks, remembered the satisfaction of knowing Daniel would graduate debt-free. Third, the student loans. You co-signed for $17,000 in student loans that Daniel took out for living expenses during college. 2 years after graduation, you paid them off in full without telling him. We have the documentation showing you as the co-signer and the payment records showing you paid the balance. What else? Patricia pulled out another set of papers. The car loans. You co-signed for his first car purchase when he was 24. A $15,000 loan for a Honda Accord. You paid this off 18 months early, again without telling him. We have the loan documents and the payment records. And the apartment? Yes. For 12 months, you supplemented his rent by $400 per month, paying the difference directly to the landlord. Total of $6,000. The landlord has provided us with a signed statement confirming this arrangement. I felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Pride that I'd been able to do all of this, sadness that Daniel had never known. Finally, Patricia continued, there's the house on Evergreen Street. You purchased this property 8 years ago through an LLC for $220,000. You've rented it out since then, using the rental income to fund additional contributions to Daniel's trust. The deed was transferred to Daniel's name 6 years ago, though he was never informed. The property is currently worth approximately $390,000. She closed the folder and looked at me. Tom, you have documentation for every single claim you're going to make tomorrow. Everything is notarized, filed, and indisputable. Vivian and Gerald can't challenge any of this without looking like fools. What about their contributions? Have you found anything? Patricia smiled thinly. That's the interesting part. I did some digging. Vivian and Gerald have paid for the wedding, approximately $75,000. They've also paid for several dinners and included Daniel in some family vacations. But in terms of direct financial contribution to Daniel himself, nothing. Zero. They haven't co-signed any loans, haven't given him any substantial gifts, haven't set up any trusts or college funds. Everything they've done has been social, not financial. So, when Vivian says they've given him opportunities, She means they've introduced him to people and included him in their social circle, which is nice, but it's not the same as funding someone's entire life. Patricia leaned forward. Tom, what you're about to do tomorrow is going to fundamentally change Daniel's relationship with his in-laws. It might even change his relationship with his wife. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for the truth to come out. That's not what I asked. I thought about it. Daniel's been living in a fog for 2 years, thinking he owes Vivian and Gerald everything, thinking I couldn't provide for him. I'm tired of watching him diminish himself to fit into their world. If revealing the truth causes problems in his marriage, then maybe those problems were already there. Patricia nodded slowly. All right, I'll be at the reception tomorrow. I'll have copies of everything, and I'll be ready to provide documentation if anyone challenges you. Just promise me one thing. What? Promise me you won't punch Gerald if he tries to argue with you. I don't want to bail you out of jail. I actually laughed. I promise. Good. Because honestly, Tom, what you're doing tomorrow might be the most satisfying legal moment of my career, and I don't want it interrupted by an assault charge. I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Everything was in place. The documentation was ready. The truth was locked and loaded, waiting to be released. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon taking care of practical matters. I got my suit dry cleaned. I picked up the folder of documents Richard had prepared. I made sure my truck had gas. Simple tasks, but they gave me something to focus on, besides the enormousness of what I was about to do. That evening, I made myself dinner, just a simple steak and salad, and ate alone at my kitchen table. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling. This house had been Daniel's home for most of his childhood. These walls had witnessed his first steps, his homework struggles, his teenage rebellions, his graduation celebrations. This was where we'd built our life together, just the two of us, doing the best we could with what we had. Tomorrow, I would make sure everyone knew exactly what we'd built. After dinner, I went to my office one last time. I opened the folder and reviewed every document, making sure nothing was missing. The trust agreements, the bank statements, the receipts, the loan documents, the property deed. It was all there, 30 years of proof that I'd been present, engaged, and actively building my son's future. I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't. He needed this last night before the wedding to be normal, to not be weighed down by what was coming. He'd know soon enough. Instead, I sat at my desk and wrote a short letter to Daniel on a piece of plain paper. I didn't know if I'd give it to him or not, but I needed to write it, needed to put into words what all these documents represented. Dear Daniel, I wrote, by the time you read this, you'll know about the trust fund, about the house, about everything I've done over the years. I didn't tell you before because I wanted you to find your own way without feeling obligated to me. But I'm telling you now because I need you to understand something. You have never been a burden. You have never been a disappointment. You have always been enough, exactly as you are. The people who make you feel otherwise are wrong. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm done being invisible. Dad. I folded the letter and put it in my wallet. Maybe I'd give it to him tomorrow. Maybe I wouldn't. But it was there if I needed it. I went to bed early but didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark and thought about tomorrow, about the moment I'd stand up at that reception and reveal the truth. I thought about Vivian's face, about Gerald's shock, about Lauren's reaction. Most of all, I thought about Daniel, about how he'd respond to learning that his entire understanding of his life had been incomplete. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Daniel. Can't sleep, nervous about tomorrow, wish you were here. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, I'm always here, son, and I always will be. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. His response came a minute later. Love you, Dad. Love you too, I wrote back. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. In less than 12 hours, everything would change. The truth would be out. The foundation I'd built would finally be visible. And Vivian and Gerald would learn that appearances mean nothing when the weight of reality comes crushing down. The reception hall was even more impressive in person than it had been from the road. The building was modern, all glass and exposed steel beams, with a massive chandelier hanging from the center of the ceiling. The tables were draped in white linen, each one set with crystal glasses and gold-rimmed plates. The centerpieces were elaborate arrangements of white roses and greenery, and the whole room smelled like expensive flowers and new carpet. I arrived early, before most of the guests. I wore the same charcoal suit from the ceremony, but I'd changed my tie to something slightly more formal, a dark blue silk that had been a gift from Daniel 3 Christmases ago. I wanted to look like I belonged, even if I didn't. The wedding party was taking photos outside, so the hall was mostly empty. A few staff members were doing last-minute adjustments, straightening chairs, adjusting lights. I walked through the space slowly, taking it all in. Table 12 was in the back left corner, exactly where I'd expected it to be. I didn't sit down yet. Instead, I made my way toward the front, where the head table was positioned on a raised platform. That's where they'd sit. Daniel and Lauren in the center, Vivian and Gerald on one side, the maid of honor and best man on the other. It was a stage, designed to be seen, to be admired. Everything about this wedding was a performance. I heard voices and turned. The wedding party was filing in through a side entrance. Lauren came first, her dress freshly pressed, her makeup flawless. She was laughing at something one of the bridesmaids said. Vivian followed close behind, her champagne-colored dress swapped out for something even more dramatic, a floor-length gown in deep emerald green. She looked like she was attending a gala, not her daughter's wedding. Gerald trailed behind, his phone in one hand, his expression distracted. Daniel was at the back of the group, still in his tuxedo, his face unreadable. I stepped back, closer to the wall, and watched. Vivian spotted me. Of course she did. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. The kind of smile that said, "You're here, and I don't care." She walked over, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Thomas," she said, her voice warm and fake. "You made it." "I was invited." "Of course you were. You're Daniel's father." She paused. "Though I have to say, I'm glad Gerald and I could step in and make this day happen. It would have been so difficult otherwise." "I'm sure." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You know, I told Lauren you'd be here, and she was worried. She thought you might feel out of place, but I said, 'No, Thomas is a good man. He knows his role.'" "And what role is that?" "Supportive, quiet, grateful." She smiled again. "You've done a lovely job raising Daniel. We'll take it from here." She turned and walked away before I could respond, rejoining Lauren and the bridesmaids near the head table. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a lead blanket. Then I walked to table 12 and sat down. The guests began to arrive. The hall filled with noise, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. I watched from my corner as people found their seats, as the room transformed from an empty space into a living, breathing celebration. Most of the guests were Lauren's family and friends. I recognized a few of Daniel's co-workers, a couple of guys from his college days, but they were outnumbered. The DJ announced the arrival of the wedding party, and everyone stood and applauded as Daniel and Lauren entered the hall. They looked perfect together, like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Lauren waved to the crowd, her smile radiant. Daniel smiled too, but his eyes were scanning the room. When they landed on me, he held my gaze for a second, then looked away. They took their seats at the head table. Vivian and Gerald sat down beside them, Vivian already holding a glass of champagne. The best man stood and gave a toast, something funny and sentimental about how Daniel and Lauren were meant to be. Everyone laughed in the right places. Everyone applauded. Then Vivian stood. She didn't wait for the DJ to hand her the microphone. She just took it, her movements smooth and practiced, like she'd done this 100 times before. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "I'm Vivian, Lauren's mother, and I just want to say a few words." The room quieted. "This has been the most incredible journey," Vivian continued. "Watching my daughter find the man of her dreams, watching her build a life with someone who truly sees her for who she is. Lauren has always deserved the best, and Daniel—" She paused, smiling at him. "Daniel has proven himself worthy." I felt my jaw tighten. "Gerald and I are so proud to welcome Daniel into our family. We've done everything we can to make this day special, to give these two the start they deserve. Because that's what family does. We lift each other up. We support each other. We make sure that no one is left behind." She looked directly at me when she said it. "So here's to Daniel and Lauren. May their future be as bright and beautiful as this day." The room erupted in applause. Vivian handed the microphone back to the DJ and sat down, her expression triumphant. I didn't clap. Dinner was served. I ate mechanically, not tasting anything. The people at my table tried to make small talk, but I wasn't interested. I kept my eyes on the head table, on Daniel, on the way he barely touched his food, on the way Lauren kept leaning over to whisper things to Vivian. After dinner came the dances. The first dance, the father-daughter dance, the mother-son dance. Gerald escorted Lauren onto the floor, and they swayed to some slow song I didn't recognize. Then it was Daniel's turn. He danced with his mother-in-law, because that's what Vivian had decided. She'd told him weeks ago that it would be a nice gesture, a way to honor her. Daniel had agreed, because he didn't know how to say no. I watched them dance, and I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. The DJ made an announcement. "And now, we'd like to invite a few special people to say a few words. If you'd like to share a memory or a toast, please come on up." A few guests stood. Lauren's uncle, one of her college friends, Daniel's best man again. They each took the microphone and said something sweet and forgettable. Then the DJ looked at me. "We have one more person who'd like to speak," he said. "Daniel's father, Thomas." The room went quiet. I stood up slowly. Every eye in the hall turned toward me. I walked toward the stage, my footsteps loud in the silence. Vivian's smile faltered. Gerald frowned. Lauren looked confused. Daniel looked terrified. I took the microphone. I stood on the stage and looked out at the sea of faces staring back at me. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just held the microphone and let the weight of the silence settle over the room like a blanket. Then I spoke. "My name is Thomas Brennan," I said, "and I'm Daniel's father." Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. I kept going. "I'm not here to give a toast. I'm not here to wish the happy couple well, though I do wish them well. I'm here because some things need to be said, and I'm the only one who's going to say them." Vivian started to stand, but Gerald put a hand on her arm. She sat back down, her face flushed. "I've been quiet for a long time," I continued. "I've sat in the back. I've stayed out of the way. I've let other people take credit for things I did because I thought that's what being a good father meant. But I was wrong." I looked at Daniel. He was staring at me, his face pale. When Daniel's mother left, I made a choice. I chose to stay. I chose to raise my son alone, to work 2 jobs, to miss sleep and meals and everything else so he could have what he needed. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was my job. I paused. I paid for Daniel's braces when he was 12. I paid for his car when he was 16. I paid for every semester of his college tuition, in full, because I didn't want him starting his life in debt. I co-signed his student loans and then paid them off myself when he graduated. I covered the down payment on his first apartment. I made sure he had a foundation, a safety net, something solid to stand on. The room was silent now, completely silent. I did all of that without asking for credit because I didn't need it. But I'm asking for it now. Not because I want applause. Not because I want gratitude. But because I'm tired of being erased. I turned toward Vivian. You said I couldn't contribute. You said it was a shame I had to watch from the sidelines. You said you'd take it from here. Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. But the truth is, you didn't take it from anywhere. You showed up late to the game and acted like you built the stadium. You paid for a wedding. That's wonderful. That's generous. But you didn't pay for Daniel's life. I did. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. I set up a trust fund for Daniel when he was 5 years old. For 30 years, I've been adding to it. Every bonus, every raise, every extra dollar I could spare. As of today, that trust is worth $2.4 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth. Gerald's face went slack. Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. Daniel just stared. The trust became active the moment Daniel got married, I said. Which means, as of right now, he has access to the interest. Not the principal, that's protected until he's 35. But the interest. Enough to buy a house, start a business, live comfortably without depending on anyone. I looked at Daniel again. I also own the property on Evergreen Street. You know the one. The house with the big backyard. The one you always said you'd love to live in someday. I bought it 8 years ago. It's been rented out, but it's yours if you want it. Deed's already in your name. Daniel's eyes were wide. Dad! I'm not finished, I said. I want everyone here to understand something. I'm not sharing this information to embarrass anyone. I'm sharing it because the truth matters. Because respect matters. Because the people who build the foundation deserve to be remembered, even if they're not the loudest voices in the room. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. Vivian, Gerald, you've been generous. You've opened doors for Daniel, introduced him to people, given him opportunities. That's valuable. But don't confuse generosity with ownership. Don't mistake visibility for substance. I turned back to the crowd. I love my son. I always have. And I always will. That's not contingent on how much I spend or how loud I speak or whether I fit into your world. It's just the truth. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and stepped off the stage. The room was still silent. I walked back to my table, sat down, and waited. Then, slowly, Daniel stood up. He walked down from the head table, his movements stiff, mechanical. He walked past the guests, past Vivian and Gerald, past Lauren, and he stopped in front of me. Dad, he said. His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't need to. But you don't owe me an explanation, Daniel. You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know the truth. He knelt down beside my chair, his eyes wet. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, It's okay. It's not okay. They made me think. He stopped, his jaw clenched. They made me think you couldn't help, that you didn't care enough to help. I know. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What do I do now? You live your life. You make your own choices. And you don't let anyone rewrite your history. He nodded, then stood up. He looked back at the head table, where Lauren was sitting with her arms crossed, her face a mask of shock. Vivian was whispering furiously to Gerald, her hands gesturing wildly. Daniel turned back to me. Come on. What? Come sit with me. At the head table. Daniel, that's not... I don't care. You should be up there. You should have been up there from the beginning. He held out his hand. I looked at it, then at him, then at the room full of people watching us. I took his hand and stood up. We walked together to the head table. Vivian's mouth dropped open. Gerald looked like he wanted to disappear. Lauren stared at us, her expression unreadable. Daniel pulled out a chair, the one that had been reserved for the best man, and gestured for me to sit. "This is where you belong," he said. I sat down, and Daniel sat beside me. The DJ, sensing the moment, turned the music back on. Slowly, the noise in the room returned. Conversations, clinking glasses, nervous laughter. But it was different now. The air had shifted. Vivian leaned across the table, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you come here and humiliate us like this?" I looked at her calmly. "I didn't humiliate you. I told the truth. You ruined my daughter's wedding." "No," Daniel said, his voice firm. "You tried to ruin my relationship with my father, and I let you. But that's over now." Lauren finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Daniel, we need to talk." "We will," he said. "But not here. Not now. My father just told the truth, something I should have heard a long time ago." Vivian stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Gerald, we're leaving." Gerald hesitated, then stood. "Lauren?" Lauren looked at Daniel, then at me, then back at her parents. "Go," she said. "I'll call you later." Vivian's face went pale. "Lauren." "I said I'll call you later." Vivian grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit, Gerald following close behind. A few guests watched them go, their expressions a mixture of shock and curiosity. The rest of the reception continued, but it was quieter now, more subdued. People ate, danced, took photos, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. I didn't care. I sat at the head table next to my son, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, as the night wound down and guests began to leave, Daniel pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for being there even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it." He hugged me then, tight and desperate, the way he used to when he was a kid and something had scared him. I hugged him back and felt the years of distance collapse between us. When he pulled away, his eyes were red but clear. "I have a lot to figure out," he said. "About Lauren, about her family, about what I want. Take your time. You've got options now." He smiled, a real smile, and nodded. I left the reception at midnight. I drove home through empty streets, the city quiet and still. When I got back to my house, I sat in my office and looked at the wooden box in my desk drawer. I opened it again, looked at the photos, and closed it carefully. Then I shut off the lights and went to bed. I didn't sleep right away. I lay in the dark and thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd said, everything I'd revealed. I thought about Vivian's face when I'd mentioned